Welcome everybody to the New Zealand Initiative webinar. This episode is about our new report, Save Our Schools. And I'm joined today by three really fascinating and distinguished guests. We've got Professor James Chapman. Professor Chapman has a career of literacy research behind him, and he's worked hard to see better methods of teaching literacy established in our schools. So welcome, James. And we have Dr Helen Walls, who is one of New Zealand's foremost experts in the teaching of writing in primary schools. And she is also out there working hard to make a big difference. So welcome to you, Helen. And last but certainly not least, we have Iain Taylor, who is the principal of Manurewa Intermediate School in Auckland. And I visited Iain's school a few weeks ago, and it was a truly inspiring place. Contrary to what people might hear about low decile schools, this place was immaculate, and it was very clear that all the students there were having a wonderful experience. So let's start. Well, actually, I should mention a couple of housekeeping things. We have a Slido display, which allows attendees to ask questions. So you can do that by going to slido.com. I've put this in the chat, and there's a code there in the chat as well, which you can use to log into this session. And the code number is 4182641. That's 4182641. I'd also like to thank the New Zealand Herald, who are recording this webinar and will be making it available on their podcast in the next few days. And for those of you who don't already subscribe to the New Zealand Initiative newsletter, you can go to our website and do so. Now, what I'm going to do is actually start off by asking each of our panelists a question which is tailored to their expertise, and then we'll move into some more general discussion. So I'd like to start with you, please, James. So as we know, for decades, New Zealand schools have been teaching literacy in a way that research has shown is not the most effective. And yet the ministry has persisted in promulgating those methods and has failed to promulgate much more well-evinced ones. Can you speculate, or from your knowledge, let us know why you think that is, what the background of what we call the reading wars, what part that might have played in the problem that we have, and what the way ahead might be?
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and greetings everyone who are participating in this session. I guess the reading wars appear to have gone on forever, like decades and decades, and perhaps they became most prominent with Rudolf Flesch's book, Why Johnny Can't Read, which was published in 1955 and referred primarily to the American experience and the lack of so-called phonics teaching at the time. New Zealand never really had what is often referred to as a skill and drill hardcore phonics approach to reading instruction. We had a more, what has often been referred to as a progressive approach to the teaching of reading, that basically was a sort of a whole word method. So there wasn't a lot of phonics as such, but there was a whole word teaching. Things really changed quite significantly, I think, in the early 1960s, when the English publications Janet and John, which were the school readers for beginning readers in the junior primary school, when it was decided that these sort of English orientated reading books for young children were no longer suitable in New Zealand. And so in the 60s, the Ready to Read series, which continue in various forms right through to today, were introduced and became really heavily instantiated by the former Department of Education in 1983 when they published the teacher guide, Reading in the Junior Classes. And that book was very much a whole language approach to literacy instruction. And the book was supplied free of charge to schools throughout New Zealand, to teachers' colleges throughout New Zealand. And that then came to what we now refer to as a common practice model. It was a very rigid, common practice to teach reading the way that it was thought people learn to read. That is, it was thought that people learn to read the same way that we learn to speak, which is total garbage. It is demonstrably, biologically untrue. We learn to speak as a function of our biological heritage, and most children, as long as there is no serious sensory deficit, will learn to speak whatever the language of their community is. And so it was a total misapplication of a myth that children will learn to read as long as they are immersed in a print-rich environment. We don't need to formally instruct them in how words work. They will learn to read through some sort of osmosis process. And that was a very, very dominant view in the ministry, the former Department of Education, then into the Ministry of Education, right through, I think, probably until the middle of the 2010s, when I sensed there was a change in the Ministry of Education. But for a long time, that view was held that we don't need to explicitly teach the alphabetic code. We shouldn't teach anything to do with phonics, anything to do with the development of word decoding skills. And yet cognitive science was emerging in the mid-1980s to show already that that was demonstrably wrong and a poor approach to reading instruction. So we have this fairly long history. New Zealand adopted what I refer to as a pretty radical approach to whole language. And writers at the time provided instructional books throughout New Zealand, really pushing this view, as did Murray Clay, who not only developed and founded Reading Recovery, but also had an enormous influence on the teaching of reading in the junior primary school. And sadly, there was a rejection of scientific research until very, very recently. So the scientific research based on emerging cognitive research was dismissed out of hand by officials in the Ministry of Education, by various school leaders throughout New Zealand. And even the Literacy Experts Group, which was formed to shadow the Literacy Task Force formed in the late 1990s, arrived at unanimous recommendations about the importance of developing word decoding skills. And these were very diverse people. I was on the group, and people from opposite side of this were on the group, but we reached unanimous recommendations, dismissed. In the year 2000, there was a parliamentary select committee. The Education and Science Select Committee reached 53 unanimous recommendations across the 5 political parties in the parliament at the time. They were dismissed by the Minister of Education at the time. So it really has been an uphill battle to get the sorts of changes that are needed to better equip far more children in terms of how they learn to read.
Yeah, thanks for that, James. I mean, that distinction you drew between oral language and literacy, I mean, of course, that's true. And I think it was really the linguist Noam Chomsky who drew attention to that in the early 1950s. He wrote a critique of B.F. Skinner's verbal behavior.
Yes.
That was pretty devastating to the idea that oral language was learned the way we learn literacy or numeracy or disciplinary knowledge or any of the other things that we acquire as secondary knowledge in the world. Why anyone after that would have thought that literacy ought to be taught as if it were oral language remains a little bit of a mystery. But with a bit of luck, the data that we're seeing now, which are pretty bad in terms of New Zealand's young people's literacy rates, will prompt a real change. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
As it should, given that the Ministry of Education has funded 2 longitudinal studies at Massey University and is currently funding University of Canterbury research all of which show clearly the importance of explicit direct instruction in the development of the sort of skills that will help kids to code words as they learn to read.
Yeah. Yes. And so, Helen, on a related topic, we'll turn to writing in your case. And look, I mean, I think a lot about what the purposes of education are, and it seems to me one of the really important reasons to fund public education and to make it universally available and compulsory is to break intergenerational cycles of poverty and disadvantage. And yet New Zealand has one of the steepest socioeconomic gradients in the developed world when it comes to educational inequality. And I know you've worked in what used to be called low decile schools and now high equity index schools. And you've researched your own method of teaching writing. But I'm interested in why you think it is that these recent data from the ministry showed that only 2%, that's 1 in 50 kids, 14 or 15 from decile 1 schools are able to write at a basic adult level. And what ought we be doing about that? Why does it play out so badly, especially for writing?
So yes, so it's a shameful statistic, and it does not reflect the potential of students in these schools. You know, I spent 12 of my 20 years as a classroom teacher in a decile 1 school here in Manurewa, and I always loved working with the children there so much for their intelligence and their responsiveness. So you know, it is about what we're doing in terms of, you know, teacher training and professional development. I also, I guess I would like to say that, you know, all teachers work hard, but, you know, the stress of financial hardship on lower decile communities is real, and the impacts of that stress are felt in our classrooms. So decile 1 environments can be particularly challenging, and I think it's time that the Ministry of Education acknowledged this and gave some targeted support to teachers and students in these schools. You know, if you've got, for example, a large number of students for whom English is a second language, you know, that's going to mean that you need to spend more time working in smaller groups. You're going to need to use more repetition to help students learn, for example, new spelling patterns or sentence structures. So, you know, so this really needs to be acknowledged, and I think there is a good case for actually trying to reduce class sizes in lower decile schools, and especially in junior classrooms. Yeah, so, you know, why are things so bad for writing and for our decile 1 communities especially? You know, really, the Ministry of Education has been communicating the exact wrong advice to teachers about what works in writing instruction. They've made some absolutely huge mistakes there. You know, for example, the teaching handbook, Effective Literacy Practice. I tell teachers now, you know, they should read that book and play a game of opposites. They should do the opposite of what is suggested by the ministry in terms of, you know, getting their students writing. So, I mean, we see this especially, for example, with the lack of emphasis given to the importance of teaching handwriting. You know, if students are not taught to form letters accurately and automatically early on, then that will occupy all their working memory while they try to write, and they won't be able to think about other things like, you know, the structure of the sentence, the vocabulary that they want to use, spelling patterns, punctuation use. So, you know, so mistakes like this have had a really devastating impact. And I guess, as well as, you know, what I'm hoping is that conversations like this will lead to some swift and some targeted action. So, you know, targeted action for our decile 1 communities, but also especially for our teachers of junior students in these decile 1 schools, because with things like a lack of handwriting instruction happening, we get Matthew effects. So we get this rich get richer, poor get poorer thing. Primary school, instead of being the great equalizer that it should be, is actually causing, the children who enter school with some good literacy knowledge and skills already in place, they do okay, but the ones who enter with limited knowledge and skills are staying low, and our gap is getting wider. And so, the lack of handwriting instruction is one example of, I guess, a problem leading to Matthew effect. So if I don't learn to form my letters, I start to hate writing. I feel like I'm not good at writing, so I avoid writing practice and I don't get better. And there'll be lots of examples of other really key skills, basically those foundational skills that need to be taught well and early. Our teachers, no fault of their own, teachers are working so hard. I advocate for teachers wherever I go. Our teachers are doing their best with the knowledge they've been given, but they have not been given the right information. Yeah.
Yes, they've been sold out by poor training, and I'd like to come back to that later. But there are a couple of things well worth picking up on what you've just said there, Helen. I mean, one is the foundational nature of literacy and the Matthew effects, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and of course that continues throughout schooling. If young people enter high school, secondary school without sufficient literacy, then they're obstructed from accessing the wider curriculum entirely. And I expect Iain will have a few things to say about that in a minute. But the other thing that I'd really like to emphasize is there you mentioned working memory. This is, of course, our short-term memory system, which we use to really store novel information. And we can think of learning as the process of transferring knowledge from working memory, the short-term store, into long-term memory, which has a much greater capacity and is much more durable. And as you alluded, if working memory is overloaded, then young people get confused and they conclude that they're not very good learners and so on. So it seems to me that's a really key thing for teachers to understand.
Yes.
So Iain, let's turn to you. And I was actually interviewed recently alongside another Auckland principal, and she claimed that really our education system is perfectly fine, that there's nothing wrong with it. And really the problems in our schools stem from wider social issues, and there's not really a great deal that schools can do about that. But having visited your school, it seems to put the lie to that. And I thought you might have a few things to say about that idea. So perhaps I'll ask you to contribute at this stage.
Okay, hi, g'day everyone. Hello everyone out there in the IT world. I mean, it's a dilemma. I mean, it's really important, obviously, that we acknowledge teaching nowadays is definitely a complex job. It's way more so than it used to be. And yes, we need to take into account all the social issues of the day, I guess, which is why it's even more imperative, though, that we're stronger in our schools, that we have the right people in them. We have a curriculum that's engaging and exciting and fun, that it's relevant and it's enabling and exciting and fun for kids so that they actually want to be at school. And if we do that properly, then kids will be learning and achieving. So I guess principals and school leaders have really got to stop and think and ask ourselves first, and really deeply, what is it that improves student achievement? What conditions enable us to do that? And what can we do to make it right? But we've got to remember as well, no one makes us teach. So if we find it difficult, or we find it too complex, or we can't do it very well, then we shouldn't be there. And that creates another issue around staffing, of course. So whilst I wouldn't say there's something fundamentally wrong with our system per se, I do think that we're going astray in a big way. And we have been doing that for a few years. So we can't blame COVID. We can't blame the poverty-stricken community we might be serving. And I guess one of the easiest ways is to start actually talking to leaders in our schools who are actually running the school effectively and think what the solution could be. I mean, it comes down to being a thoughtful, practical, hardworking leader. So we know academics might talk and talk, and the ministry might talk and talk, but it's the effective ones out there that need to be talked to in terms of what is it that we're doing about developing a curriculum that's exciting, that's passionate for kids, that's engaging them and wanting them to be at school. So we could come up with every excuse in the world, but it's not going to solve the problem we've got, and we've got a problem.
Yeah, and I imagine the ministry must be bashing your door down since you run such an eminently successful school in an area that is quite disadvantaged. Have you heard from them about the keys to your success? And
not specifically. I mean, we have a heck of a lot of visitors from all around the country and from overseas, but we, interestingly enough, don't have a lot of visitors from our own local community as such. But we're in the education, right? We're in the tall poppy world. Whenever we do something, you're knocked down. If you do something that's good or different to other people, you get bashed. So that is a problem, because we can all learn from everyone. No matter how good or bad we are in our schools, every school is doing something that's good or effective. So we all should be learning off each other without a doubt. But it's a concern.
I'd like to hear more about what it was that you did in your school. So you've been principal there for what, 15 years or so?
Just nearly 15, yes.
Yeah, and so when you came, what was your school like?
Oh, well, that could take the whole podcast. It was in dire straits. It was under ministry intervention. It had huge financial, learning and teaching, staffing, property issues in every imaginable way. So we set about, firstly, trying to engage our kids in terms of wanting kids to be at school. So how do you do that? You have to develop a curriculum that turns them on, that makes them want to be at school. And we actually became quite old-fashioned. And unfortunately, old-fashioned gets knocked these days. And you know what? A bit of didactic teaching actually works. And in our type of community, it works even more so, I believe. I'm not saying we're right. It's right for us. And when kids are feeling successful and they are achieving, they're going to learn more and they're going to achieve more. So their standards are going to improve. And there's a place for saying to kids, sit down, keep your mouth shut, open your ears and listen and learn. And the problem is we've gone down this inquiry road so deeply, it's creating a whole lot of issues around teachers and teaching. Instead of teaching, they might be facilitating too much. And sometimes a teacher needs to stand in front of the class, walk around the class, sit down with a group and actually teach. Teach knowledge that is relevant to the kids, that they need to know. So therefore the relationship with the kids is really important. We need to know our kids and our learners so deeply to know what they need and what's going to make a difference for them in their learning. And that's what's got to happen first. And I guess all the stuff around the sociological stuff and inquiry means teachers aren't teaching. They're not actually deliberately teaching stuff.
Well, they're quite discouraged from doing so often in their training. We have this saying which annoys the hell out of me. You know, they should be guides on the side rather than sages on the stage or whatever. And what you're saying is that there may be a place for being a guide on the side from time to time, but there's also a definite place for the sage on the stage.
Absolutely. It's about a balance. And I think we've become too unbalanced, and all the PC stuff around how we should be teaching. And if you are teaching in a didactic way, you're seen to be an old dinosaur, and therefore you shouldn't be doing that. Well, you know what? Sometimes you have to do that. Well,
I have to say that when I was walking around your school, I was shown around Iain's school by a couple of Year 8 girls, and they and every other child I met during that tour were courteous, articulate, and immensely proud of the place. It shone in their eyes. So the evidence is there for anyone to see. And if there is anyone from the Ministry of Education listening today, I'd strongly encourage that you pay a visit to Manurewa Intermediate if you want to see real success for some of the most disadvantaged, socioeconomically disadvantaged students in the country.
And I mean, going back to the curriculum, I mean, the curriculum is the curriculum, and it's the people and the teacher that bring it to life, right? And that's what's not necessarily happening, because the curriculum is so unknown. It's so airy-fairy. It's not specific enough. And we do need some specificity about what it is we're trying to teach or what we need to teach. And knowledge is important, but it's got to be relevant knowledge. And we're losing so much of that.
Yes. I sort of see the two crumbling pillars on which our education system is teetering. One of them is the shoddy curriculum, and the other, I think, to me, is even more important, and that is the way in which teachers are trained and prepared for the classroom. And I would like to turn to that now, because I think all three of you will have some views on this, and it goes to one of the questions that's come through. So what do you think are the big gaps in teacher education? We might return to James first and then go around with that question.
Well, to me, the big gap is more of a flaw than a gap as such. And having been head of a college of education for 10 years, I guess I got to see up close and personal what I think is leading us astray. And Iain talked about discovery and that. There is a constructivist zeitgeist. That is, children will co-construct the knowledge that will help them learn. Now, some knowledge can be co-constructed, but for novice learners, the research is pretty clear-cut that more direct, explicit instruction will give students some material in which they can then work in groups, that they can then work in other sort of meaningful ways. They can then go out and apply what they've learned and discover new learning around that. But unfortunately, this constructivist zeitgeist, which is predominant in most, if not all, probably most colleges of education, and predominant in seemingly in most classrooms across the country, primary through senior secondary school, is going to do a massive disservice to many, many children. And the cognitive science is very clear-cut about that. You mentioned earlier, Michael, about short-term memory, long-term memory, and so forth, and cognitive load theory. The idea that if kids are busy trying to figure out what it is they're supposed to be learning, then they actually don't have enough memory space, memory capacity, cognitive capacity to deal with what is important and to sort out the noise from the signal, to sort out what's really important from all the other stuff. So I think teacher education in New Zealand for many decades now has let us down quite significantly, and that needs to change. And along with that, the Teaching Council needs to take a much stronger leading role in terms of teacher education in New Zealand.
Right. And what do you think it is? I mean, you've been around teacher education probably for most of your career. How did these ideas take hold? Is it connected with the whole language thing, or is it something separate? I mean, we can think of constructivism, I think, in as a sort of spectrum, or at least in two broad categories. And we'd probably say cognitively, yes, people need to construct models of the world in their heads. That isn't so controversial, but it's this idea that they need to construct them on their own, or at least, you know, maybe in partnership with a teacher, but not with teachers directly instructing them. Where did that idea come from?
Well, I think that certainly the whole language movement in the late 70s and early 1980s also paralleled a broader constructivist learning by discovery approach. And I think it was Jerome Bruner in 1956, I think, possibly 66, who wrote a book on learning by discovery. And a lot of people liked it because intuitively it seemed to make sense to people in New Zealand and the US and most countries, English speaking, non-English speaking. It was like being immersed in a warm bath. It was a sort of warm bath approach to teaching. That, in other words, you shouldn't tell kids stuff. You should let kids find out stuff on their own, basically. Or as you mentioned earlier on, the sort of guide by the side. But the research has shown quite clearly that for novice learners, and we're all novice learners to some extent, right through to doctoral level, we're all novice learners at some point. But as you're learning new stuff, that is extraordinarily time consuming, a waste of time for many, many kids whose memory system will just be totally overloaded, and they will miss the point of what it is that they're supposed to be learning. And that is the case in literacy and beginning reading, writing, communication, as it is in the case in a whole raft of other subjects as well. And thank goodness, when I was a secondary teacher of history, social studies, geography, that sort of constructivist zeitgeist was very, very weak at the time and not at all dominant. And I was pleased with the way that my teacher education experience in New Zealand worked well and meant that kids actually can enjoy. And the idea of having agency as learning comes about when kids feel that they're successful in learning. You feel successful in learning when you can actually learn stuff and you're told how to learn stuff and where to learn stuff and not left on your own to sort of try and figure everything out.
It's a terrible irony, isn't it, really, that these methods that sound nice and are supposed to make kids feel engaged are actually the very thing that's most likely to disengage them, and the more traditional methods, because as you say, when they experience success, that is engaging.
That's it.
Helen, what do you think in terms of, what we need to do to repair teacher education? Where are we going wrong?
So a few points, Michael. First of all, from, anecdotally, what I know of, for example, the university training programs is that there's a lot of discussion of sort of philosophies of Russian theorists from the, late 1800s, like Vygotsky, and lots of discussion of, the trainees' own philosophies of teaching, instead of actually the lecturers equipping these trainee teachers with methods that have been demonstrated to be effective in the numerous empirical studies that have been conducted over the past 50 years. So that's a problem. So that's anecdotally. So, for example, I'm meeting first year teachers who tell me they never heard the words handwriting or spelling mentioned once in their training program. And yet handwriting skill is the biggest predictor of writing achievement in year one. And spelling and handwriting combined continue to be very strong predictors of achievement right up into year 5 and 6. Then a second point is that there's been some research done into this and into teachers' preparedness or teachers' perceptions of their preparedness to teach after their ITE years. And, with regards to spelling, I think around 70% of respondents to a survey of preparedness to teach spelling reported that their training had been inadequate. In terms of preparedness to teach writing, as in composition, it was similar. Around 69% of respondents reported that their training had been inadequate. So, the student teachers know they're not getting a good deal here. Another point I'd say is that, the university training is very theoretical, with a lot of time spent in lecture theatres and not enough time spent in classrooms. Teaching is a practical job. We really do need to learn it, a lot of it on the job. At the New Zealand Graduate School, which is a wonderful, different kind of positive example. I remember they said to me when I entered, learning to teach by sitting in a lecture theatre is like learning to drive by reading a book. We actually do need to learn by doing it. And just one last thing I'd like to say here is that, as well as really sorting initial teacher education out, as soon as we can, we really do also need to look at some targeted professional learning for teachers who are already working in our schools. And so here, once again, I'd love to come back to this idea of supporting our lowest decile teachers first. If we gave them a really fantastic on-the-job training program and evidence-based approaches for teaching reading and writing, and we perhaps, combine the training with some assessment and even some accreditation, we could be supporting those students who are burning out to stay in the job and feel successful. We could be attracting really enthusiastic, committed new teachers into those lowest decile schools where they are needed the most. So I'd really love to see some innovative thinking around this by the ministry. And just also to support what James and Iain have both said about the importance of explicit teaching. All the research tells us this. We need to be explicitly teaching, especially the key skills around reading and writing. We're teaching children to use an invented code. So of course, this must involve some explicit teaching. And I thought as well about Iain's comment around the curriculum and knowledge. I've recently written a research review for the Education Hub on vocabulary knowledge. And, the size of vocabulary knowledge is the strongest predictor of reading comprehension by year 8. It's a strong predictor by year 4. And one of James's articles taught me that it's a predictor even in year 1. But, so we need large vocabularies of words we understand. And there are, once again, massive disparities in the sizes of the vocabulary of our high income versus our low income students, with probably twice the number of words understood by a high income student by the age of 9. So there, of course, to teach vocabulary, we need to bring some knowledge back, don't we?
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Helen. And your point is well made about the need for teachers to have plenty of practice during their training. I spoke earlier this week, actually, with Kevin Knight, who is the head of the Graduate School of Education, where I think you were trained, and he did make the comment that one of the issues is with teachers on practica in classrooms is that it can amplify the problems if the associate teacher looking after them gives them the wrong ideas. So perhaps you could tell the listeners how the graduate school handles that problem.
Yeah, so it's quite a brilliant system. So you spend, I think, about 7 out of every 11-week term. One of your holiday weeks is a week where you're putting together a portfolio about your experience on TE. So 7 of those 11 weeks are spent in classrooms. The other few weeks are coursework, learning about the curriculum and so on, and lessons that are going to work and methods that are going to work. But you're in classrooms every day and for these other 7 weeks, and every night you're paging in to let the centre know what you will be doing the next day, so that they can send tutors out to observe you. And they're sending tutors out really frequently, like about 3 times a week. And these observations are followed by a very targeted little reflection session where you're given feedback in the form of positives and advice. Right. It works really well. So it means that you're learning from tutors and everyone's kind of on the same page about, what's expected. It means as well that instead of like the university model, you might be observed twice a term by a lecturer and it's a high stakes situation. So you just want to pass and get through it. Instead, with the grad school, your observations are about formative assessment that's going to help you to know where you are on your journey to becoming a teacher, the things you're already doing well, and then what you need to practice a bit more. So it's a really great model. Yeah.
Thank you, Helen. Now, Iain, of course, you're on the other end of teacher training. You're the one taking in teacher graduates. Have you noticed change in the extent to which teachers are prepared for the classroom when they're beginning their careers?
Absolutely unprepared, and that's not demeaning the people themselves. I mean, the issue started many years ago, really, when training colleges became universities. And I mean, I don't want to demean universities, and we want our teachers to be intelligent, obviously, but Helen said it, they need to be practical as well. So the old teachers college days were far more superior in the sense of practical, right? You need to be practical first and foremost. You need to be a real person. You need to be a human being who knows to have a laugh and have fun and interact with kids. But you also have the confidence. You have to have the confidence to bring a kid into tow or tell them off if you need to. So you've got to have a personality. And I'm seeing more and more students are coming out of the universities and they don't necessarily have a personality. Or is it that they didn't want to be a teacher to start with? I mean, I trained 84 to 86 and we spent lots of time in classrooms learning, and we came out knowing how to teach reading. So, or if we didn't, we at least knew what a good reading program looked like. We knew how to do a running record, and we knew how to analyze that running record instead of just doing a running record and not having any understanding whatsoever in terms of how that can impact on your teaching. So there's a real concern around all that stuff. And I think the marrying up the permissiveness of our curriculum as well, which has become so nondescript, as I said before, and the lack of specificity, they come out of training college not actually knowing what it is we're going to teach. How do we teach? What is it we're teaching? And it's a huge issue for schools. And we keep getting told by the universities, of course, well, it's a 5-year program. They do their degree. They're in your school for 2 years and they're carrying on being taught, which they are. But really, you're starting from scratch because their practicums haven't been necessarily effectively administered, or the time has been very, very low. So
Right.
ITE, you've got a lot to answer for.
Yes, and I think that consistency of feedback and coaching that the graduate school offers is got a huge amount going for it. Obviously, if we've got a teacher force that is increasingly ill prepared, then many associate teachers are also going to be handing on things that don't work, and that may actually answer one of the questions that's come through here, which is an interesting question. So David is commenting that international tests like Pisa have been showing continual declines in our reading scores over the last 20 years. From what you were saying earlier, James, the whole language approach has been in place for longer than that. So we might think that we would have plateaued a long time ago, and yet the decline continues. What would you attribute that to, if there hasn't been any significant change in how things work over the last couple of decades?
Well, in terms of Pisa scores, Pisa scores of the 15-year-olds in our secondary school, they will follow the decline that has been shown in the Pearls scores for Year 5 children, mainly 10-year-olds in New Zealand schools. And that in turn will reflect the way children have been taught to read in the first 2 to 3 years of their schooling when they start at age 5. So to me, it's absolutely logical that the PISA scores for 15-year-olds would decline because of the decline that has been going on in the junior primary school, Year 5 children, and so on. Kids don't suddenly learn to read when they go to intermediate school or when they go to secondary school. And they don't suddenly stop learning to be able to read when they leave secondary school. If the foundations aren't there for learning to read, then they're not going to read to learn. And that'll show up in these international surveys. Complaining about the international surveys, oh, well, they don't really reflect what we teach in our schools, is a bit of a nonsense, really. They're an indicator. It's just like in the old days anyway, you go to the doctor and the doctor would tap your knee with a little hammer, and you don't go home practicing tapping your knee with a little hammer. It's an indicator. And so these Pisa and Pearls scores are indicators of the ability of children in our schools on an international stage to be able to learn to read. And at one point in 1970, we were actually top of the world, apparently, in terms of our literacy scores for teenage kids in the first international survey. And then when the survey for Year 5 children started in 1991, I think it was, we didn't do too bad, but we've steadily declined since then. So the last survey that was done of Year 5 students, I think pre-COVID 2016 or thereabouts, we were the lowest of the English language countries, the lowest. Yes. And it's of no surprise to me whatsoever because of the way that we have persisted in teaching reading.
Right.
And writing and spelling.
Yeah. And handwriting.
Yes.
Yeah. And so what else can we learn? You know, any of you who might know about the international tests, I'd invite to chip in here. What can we learn from countries that do well in those tests? What are the factors that govern their success? Clearly, we have something to learn from them. Is it, for example, the esteem in which the teaching profession is held in, say, Northern Europe and East Asia, which tend to be the countries that shine in those tests? Is it just the methods that are used? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a mixture of the two that you just mentioned, Michael. Certainly the methods of teaching in Asian schools. And I know a lot of us probably wouldn't want to have a rigid approach to teaching that is perhaps frequent in a number of Asian countries. So I'm not necessarily advocating for that, but certainly a more structured, explicit approach to teaching is a bit more pervasive in most Asian countries. I think that is definitely a factor. We can learn a lot also from changes that have been made in some education systems. In England and Wales, for example, between 2006-2010, following a major report on the teaching of reading, significant changes were made to the teaching of reading. to include phonics and other word identification approaches and strategies. And following the introduction, a few years later, there'll always be a lag, the scores for England and Wales went up. Now, it's hard to draw a direct line between the two, but it's pretty strongly suggested that there is a direct causal relationship between the changes that were introduced in England and Wales. And I guess Scotland also did much more of a word level phonics type approach. I hesitate to use the word phonics because it's usually misused and misunderstood. So this isn't about phonics, it's about a whole package of things to do with understanding how the alphabet works and the letters and the sounds in the alphabet. So we can learn a lot, and I think as we see some states in Australia doing away with reading recovery, doing away with whole language, some parts of the United States, one state, for example, Mississippi, often reported about its significant improvements that have been made in education in a state that is often marked by relatively high levels of poverty and disadvantage. So we can learn a lot as well. Yeah. Now, Iain, you've been a principal for, I think, longer than 15 years because Manurewa isn't your first gig. What have you noticed about the teaching profession in terms of its attractiveness to young people as a good thing to do? I mean, this alludes to my hypothesis that the cultural esteem that we have for teachers in New Zealand could be a lot better, and maybe that's part of the issue that we face. Of course, changing culture is hard, but what do you think about that? Oh, that's totally the problem. Teachers aren't held in high esteem by the general community. You have parents who speak to you in derogatory ways. I know Helen earlier said all teachers work hard. Well, actually, I would take issue with that. I don't think all teachers do work hard. And that's also part of a problem because there are parents who see teaching as a cushy job when it obviously is not a cushy job. And we need our best and brightest young people in this job because it's so important what we're trying to do. But if we talk about the balance of what James was talking before, it's a mixture of everything, the way we teach, right? It's a bit of the didactic old-fashioned stuff. It's a bit of the more innovative inquiry stuff. But the other problem with training is, and in our schools, new graduates don't actually know about modeling or teaching techniques around prompting, explaining, telling, directing, giving direct feedback. All those sorts of things which make a difference to a kid's learning and obviously their achievement. So it's just about getting the balance right of a curriculum that is a bit more specific, about a school that has an organizational system and structure that enables a teacher to teach more effectively and enables kids to behave more effectively. I mean, our whole philosophy in our school is actually based on the early childhood model about Reggio Emilia, which sounds bizarre. You're in a school with 12 and 13-year-olds and you're talking about Reggio Emilia, which is an early childhood philosophy, but that's all about the environment being the teacher. So they talk about the parent being the first teacher in Reggio. Well, we flipped it on its head and we say the environment is the first teacher. And by environment, we're talking about our physical environment and the environment of the people in it, in terms of how you talk to kids, how you encourage them, how you motivate them, how you hold them accountable. All that stuff is first, and that's what sort of permeates our place. We want a kid to walk in the driveway and feel turned on walking into this environment. It looks exciting, it looks clean and tidy, it's modeling good stuff for them, and then they're ready to learn. Yeah, well, I certainly noticed that walking into your school. Now, I'll just remind listeners that they can ask questions on slido.com. If you go to slido.com and enter the code 4182641, that's 4182641. Now, Helen, you were trained at the graduate school, as we've already discussed, and that's got a bit of a different approach. What have you noticed about, I don't want you to sort of dump on your colleagues or anything, but what have you noticed about the difference between how you approach teaching and what other teachers more typically, perhaps? What do you think has made the difference for you in your training, and how does it differ from what you see around?
I think the main thing, just as a general kind of observation, would be that while the grad school, as well as focusing on a range of other things, the grad school had this criteria that we would assess ourselves against every term, which was causing learning to happen. And that was in my mind as I set out in my first classrooms. Am I causing learning to happen? And I sort of found that that wasn't such a priority for lots of colleagues, that we of course care about relationships, right? Relationships are essential, that inclusive environment is essential, but not to the exclusion of causing learning to happen. Both need to be held in high regard and honoured. So that would be a difference. I was just thinking too, Michael, about the conversation about other countries and what they've done to raise achievement, and just thinking of the South Australian example with introducing the phonics screening test. And I know, of course, they took that from the UK, so the UK did it too, didn't they? Or at least England did. James, you probably know more than I do on this one. But, you know, of course, we don't want to be testing kids all the time unnecessarily, but I think there really is a strong argument to be made for introducing some standardised tests of the fundamental skills, so that all teachers know I do actually have to work on sound-to-letter correspondences in these first couple of years, because my principal is going to be asking me, excuse me, for those results, and we want downwards pressure from the ministry too onto those principals, so that the principals care. Because I think we all sort of tend to assume that, of course, everyone wants our kids to learn to read and write, but, you know, some people are perhaps not quite so convinced by the, you know, extreme sort of sense of urgency that we all have on this issue. So I think introducing a few standardized tests early on would be a good idea, of the right things.
Yeah. Well,
but we have people in the system, principals, teachers, who believe testing is bad. And that's a problem. That is a real problem. Testing for the sake of testing is bad, but you do need some form of standardized testing, and especially at those transition points, 6 to 7, 8 to 9.
Well, it's essential part of the feedback loop, isn't it? If you're not measuring the state of the environment, you can't adjust your practice to close the gap between where you are and where you want to be. It seems quite clear.
If we're waiting for the prills to tell us in year 5, that's too late for lots of kids. How are we going to remediate them? They're already feeling bad about themselves. They might have given up on attending school by that time, you know. So we need to find out much earlier. We need early intervention, and then we need consistently high quality programs throughout primary school if we're going to actually get our most vulnerable students to where they need to be by year 9.
Yeah, and Helen, you mentioned a sense of urgency, and one of the things I love about you is your manifest sense of urgency to do the best.
Well, I've met all the children, Michael. Everyone who's worked with the children is heartbroken by this situation. And I mean, it's the little ones where, you know, I'm mostly working with the little ones, but what are we doing? Is anyone talking about the vast numbers of teenagers who have already been let down by the system? What are we going to do about that? Something needs to happen for them as well.
Yes.
You know?
As I often say, and I hope not hyperbolically, our prisons are full of illiterate young men, and that is the tragic endpoint for too many. And I think another source of a sense of urgency that is really rising is parents in our community. I'm hearing more and more from parents who are disquiet or distressed even about the state of education and what they're seeing or not seeing in their children as they are supposed to be progressing through their education and yet don't seem to be learning much. And you know, I've got a question, I think probably from a parent here, Helen. Your work on how to teach writing, spelling and grammar, is that something that parents can use? And is there a way that we can put parents in touch with that work?
Yes, definitely. I can support parents. So they can contact me at via my website, which is the writingteacher.net, or Helen at thewritingteacher.net is my email. So definitely happy to help anyone who would like have some conversations.
Thank you, Helen. I've just put that web address in the chat so people can see that for themselves. Now we're just about out of time. Actually, it's nearly 2 o'clock. The time has flown. It's been a marvelous conversation, and I'm sure we could easily go on, but our audience may have other commitments, and you may too. So is there anything else that any of you would like to add before we close?
All I would want to say is we've got to make sure every staff member in every single school in our country is going to be an enthusiastic bearer of effective teaching. Because if every single person in the school is a bearer of that, then our kids will achieve. And that is so hard to do, but it's what we need to do.
Yeah. Anything from you, James?
No, I think I've probably over-talked myself anyway, but no, I agree with comments that Iain and Helen and you, Michael, have made. So I think we're pretty much on the same page.
Yes, and Helen, is there any closing comment?
Just please, someone do something as soon as possible.
Well, you're doing something now. I know that you're out there in schools trying to make a difference. You've got your writing teacher website promulgating good practice. I know that Iain's doing something with his school, and hundreds of young people every year coming out of there well prepared for secondary school who might not otherwise be. And I know that James has spent decades desperately trying to do things, and I do hope that it bears some fruit in the next few years. I think there are signs of hope, but there's still a long way to go. So I'll thank you all very much for today. It's been a wonderful conversation, and thank you to all the attendees as well. It's good to see so many people tuning into these really important questions for the future of our country and our young people. So thanks again, folks, and bye for now.
Yes,
Thank you. Cheers.